chat. This is the second fireside chat of NIM Shipyard, and these are always very nice. So I will share that these are my personal favorite shipyard events, and I'm really looking forward to today's as well. Last time we discussed the privacy primitives of Web3 with Alan Scott from Riagon DAO and Ken Lee from Manta Network, but today we're probably going to be discussing something that's even more fundamental, which are privacy narratives. And to do that, I have with me today Rose O'Leary from DarkFi, a renowned and well-known lunar punk. Is that fair to say that? Say hi to the people, please.
Hello.
Introduce yourself. What should people know about you?
Sure. So I'm Rose. I'm a developer and I work on DarkFi, which is a anonymous layer one for building anonymous applications. So we try to build like a toolkit that developers can use to assemble apps. And right now we're on testnet, and we're hoping we'll launch a mainnet very soon. And we're also allies of NIM, and we have NIM support already working on the testnet. So aside from that, I've been, I'm also a writer, and I wrote some article on Lunarpunk, which basically popularized the term within the crypto space. And I've been also thinking a lot about how do we talk about and think about privacy, and how can we make narratives that essentially help the spread of privacy in whatever way we can. So that's it for me.
Yeah, so which brings you to this exact conversation. And allies is a bit of an understatement. NIM and DarkFi go way back. So Harry and Amir are good friends from way before NIM or DarkFi existed. So it's really excellent to have you. And of course, I also have with me Jaya today, who we couldn't miss from a conversation like this. Say hi to the people, Jaya.
Hello, people. Very good to be here, and super happy to be in the room with Rose. I'll dare to say that me and Rose go way back as well. Have known each other for many years, since early days crypto. So, and I absolutely love the work and the writing that Rose does on Lunarpunk and on memetics of privacy. So I'm very much looking forward to this this session, which for me is a little bit like it's one of those fireside chats where, I would have this chat with Rose at some point, at some convenient moment, regardless, because I think there's a lot of like brainstorming to do in this area. But I like the idea of doing that with other people in the room, so we can kind of generally share thoughts more openly, and have a bit of a kind of like shared process around crafting the future narratives around privacy.
Exactly, which is a really important and burning topic when it comes to privacy. But before we jump into the conversation, let me share the usual stuff with our audience. So there will be a Q&A at the end of this session, and if you are asking something that is directly very relevant to the conversation at that point in time, then I'm gonna jump in and ask. From Jaya and Rose. So make sure to leave your questions in the YouTube or Twitch chat. We're keeping a close eye on that. Or if you want to maintain your anonymity, then you can also leave your questions in the general room of the NIM Matrix server. So without further ado, this is going to be a fireside chat with a slide deck, which I think is a first. So I'm going to share my screen, and let's see what Jaya put together for us.
Yeah, so the reason why we have a slide deck in the fireside chat is because we're talking about narratives, and when saying the word narrative, we think of words immediately, but actually narratives operate in a far more subtle way through images and through colors and that sort of thing. So I thought it'd be a very nice way to structure this conversation a little bit by actually looking at some images. But let's start with kind of defining what the problem is. So obviously Rose, Suda, and I work very heavily in the privacy space. So we think a lot about, issues like how can we make the question of privacy, the problem of privacy, resonate with people more widely. But I think it's worth kind of just taking a step back and reiterating what the problem is here exactly. Rose describes this as a memetic corner. So I thought we might start off with exploring that before we move into what will be a kind of visual crit. Next slide, Sudo.
How do I jump slides in a PDF?
You just click an arrow, go next on the arrow.
It's not working. No. Wait, damn. Sorry.
There you go. You got it.
Like that.
Great. Okay, so I personally have a hypothesis for why the word privacy actually doesn't. It remains quite abstract and doesn't really resonate so easily with people. And my hypothesis is that it's because we've actually had privacy as the default since thousands of years. As human beings, we're actually very used to having a kind of interior space that isn't constantly under observation, the ability to think freely, the ability to feel freely, and also we kind of we pick up on physical cues very much, which means that if we're in a room with someone, we assume that we're just speaking with that person and there's no third party or, you know, hundreds of third parties listening in on us. Next slide, please, Sue. A slightly more nice visual kind of representation of that. So yeah, so for thousands of years, we kind of assume that if we're around a fire with some friends, we're around the fire with those friends. While in reality, increasingly, you know, our digital lives are intertwined with our physical lives. And, you know, our digital lives are under intense surveillance. In fact, surveillance is the default online. So, you know, the vast majority of the time you will have, you know, third parties listening in. And, you know, usually, you know, if you're very, very lucky, that might be a handful of third parties, people that are operating your apps, your internet service provider, and maybe a couple of others. But in the majority of time, we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of third parties that are able to monitor and sell on your online behavior, and communications. So next slide, please. Yeah, so where we're at right now is surveillance as the default, but with a kind of set of intuitions and assumptions that we've inherited from the past thousands of years where privacy was the default. So what we're up against is really a kind of like a large educational process that starts to bring to awareness that surveillance is in fact the default. But that educational process comes with dangers, which is exactly the mimetic corner that Rose articulates so nicely. So I thought we might start off with that. Next slide, please, Suno. This, I think, represents part of what you were talking about, Rose. Maybe you can kind of just dive into, you know, what you mean when you say that privacy has ended up in a mimetic corner.
Yeah, for sure. So there's kind of two things. This slide is, I'll just kind of make comment on the slide, which is that there's definitely a relationship here where we see this kind of feedback loop where the presence of encryption technologies is being used to justify the expansion of surveillance. And more generally, like security and like national security is being used as like an argument for why we need more surveillance. So like the classic thing is the you know what happened after September 11th, when there was this like just like in the US, but also they basically instantiated a global surveillance program under the name of national security. So you know there are basically these several feedback loops that are in motion that are expanding surveillance. But what's I tried to kind of point out with this image is that, you know, there's also a relationship here where anonymity techniques are becoming increasingly sophisticated in tandem, like with that expansion of surveillance. So basically, the more sophisticated surveillance becomes, the more advanced anonymity techniques must be in order to bypass it. So there's this kind of mutual co-development of these two distinct worlds. And we basically argue that the way this maps onto crypto is that we're going to see a similar process kind of playing out, where we see a splintering of the crypto space into these surveilled you know, worlds and these anonymous worlds. But in terms of the corner, the mimetic corner, or as they also call it, like the mimetic nexus, it basically comes down to this association that privacy has with fear. And there's like a close relationship where the typical straw man argument that people use says something along the lines of, why do you need privacy if you don't have something to hide? This is a really difficult argument to kind of return from, because it basically it backs privacy memes into a corner where you're forced to either defend the use of privacy for illicit activity, or basically accept that privacy should be somehow limited. And I think that this kind of the presence of this straw man, this very sophisticated straw man argument, has had this long-lasting consequence on how we think and talk about privacy. And what I call like a nexus, a corner that is like simultaneously kind of pro-establishment and status quo, but also weirdly kind of niche and subcultural. So privacy has like both aspects at once, where it's kind of it tries to play it safe and be non-disruptive and basically accept the threat of the straw man, and at the same time it's also kind of niche and subcultural. So I call it the niche normie nexus. And when you look at privacy memes, in a way, everything about how the mainstream privacy narratives talk about privacy has some relationship to that initial straw man, that threat. Why do you need privacy if you don't have something to hide? So the classic example is, privacy is normal, which kind of harkens back to what Jaya said, which is, like privacy has been normal. It has been the default for thousands of years. But, this narrative, it has been very common within privacy since the cypherpunks, who also fashioned themselves as, it deliberately as like very normal people. Cyberpunk is kind of normcore in a way. And then at the same time, you have this other trend within privacy narratives, which basically inverts the narrative that privacy is normal and says, yes, privacy is criminal. And so we can think of like a whole other host of privacy memes, which are more in this direction of like this kind of edgy, like threatening, kind of trying to tap into that fear and use it as part of a narrative. So we see that a lot in the Monero memeplex, whereas the privacy is normal narrative is kind of more associated with Zcash. But basically, like what I've been trying to argue is that both of these memes are limited because they're basically just reacting to this straw man argument. Why do you need privacy if you don't have anything to hide? And they haven't truly, they haven't managed to properly escape that narrative. So what I think we need to be doing is like find ways of actually proposing a positive vision and basically leaving behind the straw man entirely, like moving away from it and getting out of this reactive kind of defensive framework that privacy memes have found themselves in.
Super. I completely agree. Pseudo, can you go on to the next slide? Because I think maybe we can kind of dive into a few more things there.
Before that, can I ask a question from both of you?
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's very obvious based on what Rose just said that the why do you have something to hide? Let's call it that. That meme is very powerful for some reason. That's what puts us in the corner, right? Why is that? Why is it so powerful? What do you guys think?
I mean, personally, I think it's exactly, it kind of relates back to how I kicked off our conversation, which is that because privacy, was the kind of general, state of things, the default, let's say, of our lives, when people took extra measures to be private, it might have been, that it was because they needed some extra protection, some extra reasons to hide things. So people naturally associate that with, like, I think it's the same kind of intuition, basically. It's a kind of like layers and layers of thousands of years, where, if you don't see things of assuming or like having privacy as the norm, but where like if people take an extra measure to hide themselves, so it has more to do with hiding than privacy per se. But I also think that there is a kind of deeper, maybe a kind of Western Enlightenment kind of knowledge project here that actually has to do with like some deeper trends in terms of like control of the environment and control of our surroundings. That, I think we could go pretty deep down this rabbit hole, but that has to do with a kind of understanding of trust also in the world and trust in how we know the world. That requires a certain kind of like measurement and a certain kind of observation. And that observation is the only moment at which we, as human beings, dare to trust what we actually, what's happening. And that kind of creates this need to expand the surveillance project, because it kind of links back to a kind of bigger knowledge project of stabilizing conditions in the world. But, I think I think that kind of, yeah, I'm loath to go too deep down that rabbit hole because I actually want to get to some more like surface level narrative questions.
Sorry
But
for
Rose, please,
sidetracking.
please go into your, yeah. I know you
For
have
sure.
something to say on this front as well.
I love what you said about the Enlightenment knowledge, etc. Because definitely a subtext, you know, within lunar punk and ideas of darkness and so on, as opposed to the light and of the Enlightenment. But you know, in regards to that meme, I think it's a straw man in that it basically strawmans, what they do is they're clever because they basically derail the narrative and like put the attention on something else. So like you, if like in innocence was, we're just asking for basic privacy in a digital surveillance complex, and suddenly you find yourself accused of being, you know, basically criminal. So it's like it's orthogonal to the original question, which is about like, you know, just like private, like normal privacy in the digital sphere. But like once this kind of whole question has entered the room, it puts you in this awkward position, and I think that's what makes it so sophisticated because again, you have to kind of reckon with this tricky question that we're constantly forced to reckon with as builders within privacy space. Like I'm sure Jaya and others, you know, may have found themselves on panels where people have asked them, you know, like, are you not worried about the potential that, like, you know, NIM could be used to allow terrorists to do bad things? And so it always comes back to this. But so yeah, it basically derails the argument and detracts from like the question at hand, and it puts you in this corner of either like agreeing that privacy should be restricted or doing the opposite and basically saying like no, it's, you know, and just like affirming that criminality or something. So that's why I think it's like it's just like a bad mimetic corner.
Thank you. Next slide then. Sorry, Jaya, for sidetracking the entire conversation.
No, it's totally fine because honestly, it's a topic that we should deep dive in at some point because there is something about, you know, and maybe we'll get into that in the crit part also when we're looking at the visuals, because there is something about darkness that in a variety of ways, you know, has a lot of associations with it, both linguistically and visually, with something negative and something dangerous. There's ways of getting around that, both in terms of design, if you're using kind of dark colors, and also in terms of articulation. But I actually think that there's something pretty deep here that, you know, like I said before, you know, speaks to, you know, the project of the, you know, was very much kickstarted doing the project of enlightenment, and I think also has some pretty full-on kind of racist or racial kind of underpinnings as well. But that's it is a bigger topic that, you know, I think is better for another conversation another time. I would love to have it. But for now, let's get back to this mimetic corner. So you skip one slide, I think. Go back.
Oops.
So yeah, caught in the mimetic corner, fear-based, right? So in addition to, I think what, you know, Rose, what you were just articulating very well, that has to do with this kind of defensive position that you're constantly that, you know, people who build privacy are constantly finding themselves in. My other issue is that one of the techniques for getting around that is to kind of go on the counterattack, right? And talk about just how bad surveillance is. And, you know, here again, it's fear-based, right? So here again, it's like, it might be pro-privacy, but we're talking about data dystopias. We're talking about total systems of total control. We're talking about the NSA. We're talking about, you know, all these boogeymen in the room. And so this is another kind of corner that I've found myself in, is it's almost as if we're kind of threatening people into using privacy preserving tools. And it's not a tactic that I'm a particular fan of, but somehow it's a habit for me to revert back to that, to talk about surveillance capitalism, to talk about the NSA, to talk about potential targeting. because, without mentioning that, then what exactly, what are we even doing? Without mentioning the boogeyman in the room, then what are we even doing? So I guess yeah, I'm curious to hear kind of your take on that also, when it's like, not just the mimetic corner of like, why do you need privacy if you've got nothing to hide, but also the mimetic corner of constantly articulating just how bad the situation is, and constantly creating this kind of like vision of the data dystopia that we're living in.
Yeah,
and
totally.
I think, because for me,
Sorry.
also, just one more thing to add there, like we have so many dystopias going on right now, right? So I feel like, competing with, the rise of, the next world war and climate catastrophe and economic disasters, you name it. It's like, I mean, the dystopia space is saturated. I mean, do we need more of that? Like,
Completely. So I definitely agree, and I mentioned this in one of the talks where it's like you have fear on both sides. Like you're either scared of surveillance, or you're like scared of the criminal implications of privacy. So you're just like, and this like fear-based narrative, basically it damages your ability to kind of think long term, like to plan ahead. It puts you in a reactive, a negative mindset, and it also restricts your community to basically like a very kind of paranoid, like fear-based sphere, which I think a lot of the cypherpunk movement has been very much rooted in, and obviously that that these are also like our power users in a way. So like I'm not hating on the cypherpunks, but I do think that there's an opportunity to present a kind of more positive vision. And as well, like this is what we haven't really spoken about Lunarpunk yet, but this is kind of what Lunarpunk tries to do, in that it takes from solarpunk this notion that you cannot, if you're dystopia is kind of like the cancellation of the future, and that's one of the things that cyberpunk really did, was like it was articulating these like potential technological dystopias, and cypherpunk is kind of similar, but then it brings encryption and it becomes more about freedom. But what solarpunk tried to do was like, okay, let's actually put aside these like these uh, like this smoke screen, which is preventing us from imagining new possible worlds, and actually try to think, what is the world that we do want to live in, and what does it look like, and allow that to be that kind of world building activity, to also help manifest that possible future, because there is a kind of a feedback loop where if you're constantly putting your emphasis and your energy into like some version of the future, you're kind of making it happen in a way. So like the cypherpunks were also like they were very much prepared for this apocalyptic scenario. They were like living that. They're also kind of manifesting it. At least that's my fear. So that that's one of the things that Lunarpunk tries to do, is like basically you know adopt the more utopian tendencies of solarpunk, and basically combine that with the cypherpunk critique of surveillance, to imagine as a tool for imagining like non-surveillance based futures.
maybe that's a good moment to go to the next slide, Sudo. About exiting the mimetic corner. Okay, so we found ourselves in this mimetic corner. One of the ways that I'm trying to kind of like work myself out of that is exactly to focus on empowerment and what privacy enables, rather than what it protects against or threatens to do. And we see that kind of like empowerment focused or like positive messaging, let's say, both in the pro privacy and anti privacy space, obviously, pro-privacy, the emphasis is on freedom, dignity, integrity. People use, some of these, and then of course normal is privacy being normal, as you mentioned before, which I think is a little bit still in that mimetic corner, as you mentioned. And then the anti-privacy space, which doesn't actually mention surveillance or privacy, but just assumes that surveillance is a must in order to enable things like convenience, possibility, and oversight, and so on. What are some of the kind of tactics that you've been thinking about working on? What are the bits that you're trying? Oh, I think we lost Pseudo. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you lost me for a second.
Yes. But
did you ask me the question, Jaya, or Rose?
I asked Rose the question. I'm sorry, Pseudo. I talk to you too often, so I know your feelings on the matter.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So I'm not. I don't have the definitive answers for this, but just like some possible avenues, and so I'm very interested in getting away from this kind of this reactive position, and basically towards something that's more active and affirmative, and that asserts a possible future, rather than just kind of like denying the future that's been offered to us. So like one thing is to actually like think of like what are like science fiction scenarios that actually would describe a more empowered future for people, and one that isn't based on privacy. So that's kind of one avenue, is like the actual science fiction. The other that I've been trying to do is like kind of associating privacy with life, in the sense that I see surveillance as this thing which is a kind of homogenizing force. Because what we've seen in fully doxed social media and society in general is that there's this kind of pressure to conform. So when people feel they're being monitored, but in a kind of panopticon scenario where everyone is watching everyone and feeling like there's repercussions to their actions, they monitor their behavior, and so you end up with people basically just playing very safe and kind of mimicking others, which I think is like very dangerous. I saw one recently. It was a talk by Peter Thiel, who, like that's a whole topic. I have issues. Anyway, we won't go into critique of Thiel, but just to say that he mentioned that he worked on a conservative newspaper when he was in university, and at the time, everyone was saying all these like wild. There was all this wild stuff in the newspaper, like a lot of like like very edgy content, and people saying kind of wild stuff. But as soon as that newspaper was eventually put online, the content completely changed, because people had this sense of being monitored, and I think that really impacts like the like thought in general, and like it poses a big risk to human society. So like one way to get around that is like true anonymity, and therefore like anonymity is actually allowing for divergence at the level of ideas. So I do kind of mimetically associate anonymity with divergence and differentiation, and life, in the sense that it's like more like pluralistic and fertile than this kind of top-down monitored flat space of surveillance. So that's one of the ways.
I mean, and I think that resonates quite clearly with real world cases as well, right? The fact that when you do have surveillance, then very quickly it's marginalized people that get targeted, and in fact it exacerbates marginalization, right? And we saw that also with, I think it was a big wake-up call for a lot of people in the US anyway, when with the abortion ruling, and all of a sudden you find yourself criminalized for having choice, or for exercising a choice that you used to have, right? So the kind of this kind of life affirming ability to be different and to differentiate, and to have kind of experiment with new ways of living and experiment with new ways of thought. I definitely resonate a lot with that. And in fact, that is a very good segue also to our next few slides, Pseudo, which is to begin the crit. So Rose, do I remember correctly that you also used to go to art school?
Yes, and this term fills me with fear. I'm like, oh no.
So I also used to go to art school. And for those of you who haven't, the crit is something that it's one of the kind of like key moments that happen in art school, where you present your work to everybody else, and it goes through a crit. Now, there are good crits and bad crits, but what I would like for us to do, or in my mind, what happens during a good crit is that you look at something, you take it on its own terms, first of all. And then you start to describe, how it's successful or unsuccessful within those terms, right? So it's not a kind of like general statement on good, bad, or whatever, but like, what is this visual actually trying to achieve? Is it successfully achieving that? Is it not successfully achieving that? And for what reasons? So looping back to what you were just talking about earlier about how, privacy can be seen as something kind of quite life affirming. There's some visuals that and metaphors that myself and Sarinko, who also works with the NIM project, have been using quite a bit recently, which is the metaphor of the desert and the metaphor of the forest, right? Where when you have the desert, you can imagine the sun as an all-seeing eye that's baking down on everything and anything that moves in the desert, and it's very hard to stay alive. You have to hide behind the shade of a rock to survive the day. So we can imagine the desert as a kind of environment of total surveillance that is threatening to life. And then in contrast, we can imagine privacy as the forest, where there's plenty of shade, it's very luscious. But also what I find interesting about the forest metaphor is that there might be pools of light, right? You might step in and out of the light, but your choice of when you're stepping in and out of the light is yours. And you can move through the shadows, there's a kind of a broad range of visibility or invisibility in that state, and a lot of space to move. And it's something that's luscious, life affirming, and so on. Pseudo, do you want to go to the next slide? So when NIM is part of something called the Universal Privacy Alliance, and we were going to whip up some quick visuals to set up the website and so on. So I ran with that metaphor, and I put the forest here. Now I think it's a bit unfair to start off the crit with this, because I have just given the whole background story to why it is that we chose this visual metaphor. But I would still love to hear a bit your thoughts on this direction.
Oh yeah, totally. So the forest as a metaphor has like two kind of very like tangible political historical meanings for me as like a symbol. The first is that in Ireland, where I'm from, as in much of the world, it used to be like a completely forested environment. And forests are very integral to like early Irish myth and identity, where the earliest word for Irish person, Gael, it means the forest people. And forests and trees are kind of all littered around our language, our stories, and so there's this like very deep resonance. But there's also a kind of parallel between deforestation and the like colonization, in the sense that we lost all of our forests. We now have the lowest forest in all of Europe, and that was partially to do with farming, but a lot of it happened during the colonization process where there was like several wars which used like the scorched earth tactic of basically you burn all the resources and you kill all the animals, and this process, like over the centuries, it led to many famines and like this kind of mass death of people, but also trees and animals. So that's when I started talking about forests, I was thinking about it from that perspective, where forests in Irish history were used as basically a site of resistance, where the forests were a place which kind of incubated the society from the beginning, where the people would live there. But then as time went on, they became increasingly this place for rebel activity. And also they were used extensively to launch like sabotage attacks. So they had this important significance, like from a guerrilla military perspective. So, and then at the same time, you have this association where the loss of the forest kind of corresponded to the loss of the language, the loss of the culture. So the process of reforestation that we talk about now, we talk about in a digital context and related to encryption, is also, for me, implies this kind of like cultural and linguistic barrier in the digital realm. So encryption allows for that kind of differentiation at the level of culture, and in the same way that a language does inside of societies. So that was like one side of the forest metaphor that I really like. The other is, and also I'll just mention that, like, while I spoke about this now from a very kind of Irish or Celtic situated historical way, there's also many other cultures that have their own relationship to the forest, and many examples in history of this process of deforestation basically being connected to colonization and the loss of language and the loss of culture. So, and basically extinction processes of all kinds, which I think with the presence of surveillance online, we're seeing very similar processes playing out, but in a digital sphere. Then secondly, the other reason why I think the forest is a really good metaphor is because nowadays in military context, we have the presence of these artificial intelligence powered automatic drone weapons. And that's kind of especially significant when you consider that a lot of the AI is enabled by like the total surveillance that we've been having in technology. So it's kind of fed with our data. We've basically birthed these automatic weapons, and they've completely changed the nature of warfare. So nowadays, basically the countries that have drones, if they have like large-scale drone manufacturing capabilities, are able to basically fill the sky with drones and keep the ground in this state of constant surveillance. So it's really changes the nature of warfare, and it's made warfare increasingly asymmetric. And basically, in the same way in the Middle Ages, the classes in Europe were divided into people with horses and people without horses. Now it's basically countries with drones and countries without drones. And why forests are interesting in this context is because basically forests, even now today, are the best natural protection against aerial surveillance by drones. So forests, basically obscure the heat signals of people and allow them to move freely. And so, they still have this important resonance as, protective, like defensive, natural environment that protects people from the kind of machine warfare that is very prevalent today.
Love that answer. Thanks, Rose, for adding so much more depth to that metaphor. That's fantastic. There's like volumes to write and think about there. So I know that we only have like an hour for the session, and I've got 8 visuals that I'd like to whip through. So what I'm thinking we can do is just quick fire. We've got about 15 minutes, but I know Pseudo wants to keep at least 5 or 10 for questions. So I'm going to go through them rapid fire, and what we'll do is you and I can just give one sentence of what do we think this visual is doing, what's it successful at, what's it unsuccessful at. Yeah, how does that sound? Super. Let's go, Pseudo.
Oh, so I reply. I just quickly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I like it. It has the moon. It's got an animal. I guess I personally I'm not a huge fan of the evergreen trees. I think we could have a more of a mixed forest, but otherwise, yeah, looks good.
Cool. I think yeah, it's relating very much to the lunar punk metaphors. Is able to do that in a way that feels like a beautiful and magical space.
I just want to say,
yeah,
oh, sorry. Yeah, I just want to say quickly that the moon is also a really nice symbol because the moon itself is like, it's not darkness, right? It's like light within dark. So I think it's a nice metaphor for this kind of paradigm of selective anonymity that we're moving into in the new technological age.
Super. All right, next one, Pseudo. So this one to me is trying to come across as non-threatening, as quite a kind of straightforward technology, quite practical. The writing does have the kind of like mass surveillance and freedom and this kind of like epic narrative. But I think the immediate communication of that color choice is trying to keep it kind of quite down to earth. That combined with the Mulvad logo, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is communicating to people who already know like what is a VPN and why they need one. I'm not a huge fan in that like the image kind of reminds me of like target locked, and then it's like so I find it a little bit scary, but we can continue.
Next one, Pseudo.
So I think Tor, again, you can see this is, again, the thing in the previous slide of like, it's defensive. It's like about, it's anti-surveillance. So we're not proposing anything positive here. But I think with Tor, fair enough, because they offer a genuinely useful tool. And in terms of the public perception of the darknet, it's like really like they have one of the most difficult jobs because like, the way that the darknet is understood by people is like it's a nightmare machine. So I understand why they're trying to make something very inane and just like nondescript.
Yep. Good words to describe it. Inane and nondescript. Yeah, to me it comes across as very again, very non-threatening, very pared down, trying to be quite kind of straightforward, which yeah, makes sense for what they're trying to do. Pseudo, next.
Yeah, again, Signal has been trying to make itself look more and more like one of these mainstream big tech apps. I think that's the wrong approach because you're just kind of mimicking what works. But I understand why they're doing it, and we can learn from that exercise as well. I like that they're tapping into the free speech narrative. Personally, I think that's a strong argument for privacy.
Cool. I agree with that. Let's go next.
You do?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
It looks the same to me.
Yeah, exactly. I think they're trying to do exactly the same thing. It's kind of going for the mainstream tech focus, tech first, big tech kind of easy app, this kind of vibe. And I think they do that successfully. I am curious here also about the use of lighter colors. What do you think of that, Rose?
I'm a big fan of color, and I don't think things need to be necessarily dark, although you can play with that as well. I kind of like the contrast of privacy tools using color. But you know, with this stuff, trying to like make your app as kind of like easy and like accessible as possible, falling into these patterns that have basically been established by the surveillance paradigm. I'm also very curious to see, like, you know, what are the other kinds of interfaces. I think that like people have a big demand for like some of these like sci-fi looking interfaces that we see in like the 90s films, and you know, even the 2000s, like the way things looked and the kind of terminal based stuff. Like I think that that could be like, that's much more fun, and there's way more to be explored if people are more willing to take risks at the UI level.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And I actually think that there's a little bit of a pitfall with what Signal and Proton are doing here, in that you do set yourself up for competing with big tech. You're basically saying we're the same, but with privacy, and that's not always the case. Simply because privacy does change, you know, the dynamics and user experience somewhat. And I think trying to kind of play to that and elaborate on that in a positive sense, rather than trying to kind of hide it underneath a veneer of we're the same kind of, is might be a more interesting direction to go in. Next, Pseudo. I think same.
Yeah, the
Seems to
exact
me.
same.
Yeah.
We've established there's a
We
pattern
covered
here.
it. Yes. Next. Right. Let's get into
Whoa.
NIMS.
It's fresh.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot we can say about the NIM current branding. I think we're inching our way towards something. There is, I can give a bit of a kind of background story here. We're trying to create a kind of stepping stone between what we had before, which was very much this black and orange kind of style, but trying to open up for some possibilities in the future. And we kind of started developing this kaleidoscope metaphor, which again is looking at this idea of, I mean, I guess a kind of something similar to what a forest does, but more in terms of colors, right? So the fact that you've got lots of different shades. I like to also kind of think of the colors. There's, I have this whole kind of like Goethe's color theory in the back of my mind, which is a color theory that operates in dark space rather than in light space. And looking at how we can kind of work with metaphors around differential privacy, thinking about the kind of kaleidoscope of colors instead, but starting off with this like orange space. On the side that I don't think is working very well is I think we're a little bit too abstract, to be honest. We do need to bring, what I like about forest imagery and photography more generally is that we're placing people back in the real world. And I like that. And even sci-fi drawings places people somewhat in some world, where I think we're lacking a bit of a world here.
Yeah, I think I really like that it says enabling privacy in big letters, because it's like it's very positive, affirmative. Like you're actually, creating something new. The one critique I would have is that like the second sentence, NIM protects ... It has a lot of long words, like difficult words in a way, difficult concepts. I just wonder if that's something you want to put at the forefront.
Good.
This has been ever since I joined NIM about 2 years ago. This has been one of the things that we keep hearing from the community, that we're very academic and complex and complicated with our language. So I think that hits right home.
Yep, absolutely. Next.
Whoa.
I thought we would end off with some personal crits.
So I'm obviously very biased here, so I guess I should let you speak first, Jaya.
Okay, so I think what it does super successfully is a kind of sense of a world that is, magical, that is powerful, that has a lot of potential. And, I like the nature references that are in there. What I think is, what I'm actually curious to hear your take on is there is something that feels threatening about it still, though. There is something that feels, and to some extent, I'm guessing that is partially the point, because there is a mobilizing aspect to that threatening vibe, which is like, join us in this kind of radical movement. So in that sense, it does that very successfully. But hearing you speak throughout this earlier session, I'm wondering about that choice.
Yeah, for sure. So like, there is kind of a difference between the DarkFi branding and the lunar punk imagery. And a lot of or some at least of the work that I've been doing on the meme analysis kind of front is also critiquing some of the tendencies of DarkFi. And here we can kind of see that. And I think it's good because DarkFi is its own autonomous kind of brand and an identity, and it's one that it's not as like feminine and as life centered as some of the lunar punk stuff. And it does have this kind of militancy and this, like, I would say, like masculine, aggressive kind of energy, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But it's definitely there, and it definitely does invoke some of the problems that I spoke about before, which is like related to stemming to, like, we're more on the kind of Monero side of the memes than the Zcash side of the memes.
Yeah.
So that's like that's my critique of DarkFi. But what I like about this 3 words that we've taken as a kind of slogan, anonymous, uncensored, sovereign, is that it's kind of like, and this was pointed out to me by our graphic designer, who's also like our art director, and basically the mind and the artist behind a lot of this imagery, and also why there's a difference between some of the lunarpunk stuff and the DarkFi stuff, because like he brings his own kind of energy to that. But what he pointed out was anonymous and uncensored are kind of like the preconditions for sovereignty. So I like that there's this triad of, and like there's a relationship where there's a kind of causal relationship between like the 2 anonymous and uncensored poles. But yeah, I do think DarkFi has some issues, and like in the use of fear, and it's often very very dark, which like I love. Something we want to do now is to make like brightly colored swag, which I think is really fun. That strange contrast. But I do, even if I have critiques of DarkFi in the same way I have critiques of Monero, I do find there's something compelling about this this reaction to the straw man, which is basically just to say to like this kind of affirmative reaction, which says yes, like we are your worst nightmare.
Yeah.
Do you know what?
No, I agree, and it brings a strong identity as well. Sorry, Pseudo, go ahead.
Do you know what projects in the privacy space really need? I think black merch. That would be a really original idea. Never seen it anywhere before.
Right.
I know. Sorry, guys, go on.
Maybe a black hoodie, right? I don't think anyone's done that before.
Actually.
I don't know how many black hoodies I have. Actually, it's a ridiculous amount. I'm wearing a gray one today.
Me too. Gray hoodie.
I think we can. I mean, I had a whole other section. I wanted us to go into like narrative directions, this and that. But we've spent a long time so far, and I've really loved the conversation. But let's have a few questions before we have to wrap up, Pseudo. Rose, are you okay to go over by 5 minutes?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, nice one.
We have about 11 questions, and I think that there's quite a few pretty good ones. So maybe 15 minutes over. Rose, do you have the time for that?
I can do it if Jaya is cool with that.
I do actually have a meeting that's starting in an hour. I'm just going to tell them I'm 10 minutes late, but 15 might be stretching it, just because, yeah.
All right. Excellent talk, ladies. It was really interesting. So first question is from Papu, as usual. A lot of good questions coming from Papu. To speculate, what countries do you think support privacy and will do so in 10 years as well?
I mean, countries, like, I think it's hard to say countries, because there's, countries as a kind of weird form of institution is caught in a kind of double bind, usually, if we're talking about specifically kind of nation states at this point in time, where some states do want to protect the privacy of their citizens because they understand that that's actually part of national security. You know, if you don't protect the privacy of your citizens, you're actually opening up back doors. But on the other hand, they just cannot stay away from the need to pry and know everything about their citizens as well, because it enables more control. So that's the kind of like weird trade-off and the weird space that that nation states come to, or are caught in when it comes to privacy, at least in the digital space. Actually, also more generally. But anyway, so I mean, I don't know. It's a bit hard to say any specific countries that are particularly kind of pro-privacy, and we see that like even in Europe, that's has a GDPR, which is the big kind of like pro-privacy regulation that kind of sent a beacon out into the world that digital privacy is super important. It's something that regulators take seriously, which actually did have a huge mobilizing effect, and is positive in some ways. But on the other hand, you see, European institutions, literally with the other hand, completely undermining privacy with things like the online, their version of the online safety bill, so client-side scanning and a variety of other regulations that undermine privacy in real terms. So yeah, it's always a double-edged sword when it comes to the nation state or the regional state when it comes to privacy.
Yeah, so like I agree with Jaya, and I would generally be more bullish on countries that have like good democratic processes. So like Switzerland, for example, direct democracy. If the people want privacy, like in the ideal world, like the way things are supposed to be, they should be able to demand that of their nation. But the way that it's kind of been working out is in Switzerland and globally, is that there is basically this drift towards surveillance, which is kind of creeping in outside the democratic process. So in Switzerland now, what's happening is, and there is a pushback from some people, but what's happening is basically there are institutions that are just outside the democratic process, kind of sneaking in like a lot of financial surveillance. And the argument for why they do it outside the democratic process is basically that, oh, you have to adapt to the modern world. The modern world demands that we have surveillance on the money. So if we don't implement this, we're going to be a black market and no one will trade with us. So we do have this problematic global surveillance problem that is posing a risk to all nations, even democratic ones.
All right, moving on to the next question. I think this is a really good one and kind of touches to your chat and various different points. So this is from our beloved Palmflake. Can privacy projects mitigate against governments saying, for example, these actors use this privacy technology to plan this terrorist attack in a way to persuade the public to veto privacy?
Well, I have to read that again. Can
yeah, sorry, I kind of botched it.
So I think the best way to do this is just to make privacy as permissionless and kind of globally accessible as possible. So even though governments will use all sorts of narrative techniques to prohibit people's access to privacy, the ideal is that it will be available anyway, in the same way that peer-to-peer technologies are still available to people even after the peer-to-peer wars.
Yeah, I mean, to elaborate on that a little bit, I mean, I agree with Rose, and I think the way the solution here is to basically refuse that kind of marginalization of privacy technology. And once when what we NIM is, for example, is a kind of general purpose privacy system, right? So what we offer is privacy for any internet traffic. And what I like to do there is to compare it to any other utility. So, like a water, water system, like a waterworks, like a water company wouldn't poison the waterworks or their water just because criminals are drinking from the faucet as well, right? So it's that kind of shifting the kind of like the level of expectation around privacy, again, being something that like should be there as the default, not something that comes into question at any time, any and all times. I mean, the water is a bit of a kind of horrible metaphor to be using right now, given what's happening in Palestine, the fact that the water was actually switched off. But yeah, so we are headed for dark times across the board. Anyway, yeah, moving on.
All right, moving on to the next one. This is also from Pumflake. He's asking, as a builder of in the NIM community, building tools for users, is there anything I can do to set a good example? For example, oh, that app is good, but still keeps user privacy by doing X, Y. I'm guessing the question is both what the example would be and what the X, Y could be at the end of this sentence.
So which apps you should be recommending on, as like, you know, NIM and DarkFi have given the thumbs up. I mean, it's a little bit. Am I understanding the question correctly?
Yeah, I think so. Or what practices you could highlight by certain, app developers that would be good to point to.
I mean, I actually personally think that there's a bit of there's a piece of work here that needs to happen, that we haven't actually done yet, and this is a bit of a kind of mobilizing call for, not just the Web3 but the privacy tech industry more generally, is that we do need to signal and signify a little bit better, some kind of accreditation, some form of like some way of kind of like giving people an understanding of what is actually happening behind the scene. Some kind of, maybe through an independent association that verifies certain things or something like that, so that users can have a better set of expectations, and to do that in a systematic way also, where that people, to give people a more intuitive understanding of what's happening at different layers of the stack. Because one of the things that's like the hardest when I'm asked a question like this is like, well, yeah, I mean, I could say use Signal, but it's useful for certain things, but it's really not very useful for other things, right? And it depends on what your threat model is, right? So, Signal has had this kind of issue for a long time that it phone numbers are visible, right? For certain people, that's a pretty major privacy issue, because they're faced with certain threat models. And then in other situations, like, okay, Signal is very good, but then maybe, there is this issue that, NIM solves for, which is like the transport layer is still exposed. So, there is still the possibility to track and de-anonymize by large scale agencies. But like, it's, so I guess what I'm saying is like, the answer to that question is complicated. And I think the piece of work that we need to do is decomplicate that by systematizing a little bit more how, end users can actually verify, or developers can signal to end users, what's actually going on behind the scenes.
All right, the next one is also from Papu, who I think stumbled into something even more interesting than he probably thought. With this one, so he's saying, didn't follow this case. How is it related to privacy? And then I asked him to clarify in chat, and he's talking about Roe v. Wade, because you, Jaya, mentioned the relationship between privacy and abortion rights in the U.S. What's the relationship between Roe v. Wade and privacy?
Well, exactly the fact that like all of a sudden, with Roe v. Wade overturned, having an abortion, became illegal overnight for some people. And what that basically means is that your history, your medical records, your chats, your emails, all of a sudden you become a target in a way that you were not before, just for seeking medical advice. So say, for example, you're Googling, you're trying to get some kind of understanding of, the risks or any kind of information around abortion, and you're kind of Googling that, or you're doing a search online, you're talking to a friend over your messaging apps or whatever else. All of a sudden those acts which you did before feeling kind of like secure in the fact that you could do that, all of a sudden that makes you a target, right? So it's to point to the fact that like this sentence, like, why do I need privacy if I haven't done anything wrong? The definition of whether you've done something wrong can change overnight, right? So you might not be a criminal today, but all of a sudden you could become a criminal with you literally doing the exact same things as you're doing today. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to hint at. Yeah.
There's one thing you left out of that, and it's a lesser known fact that Roe v. Wade was actually a case of privacy. So the argument was that the government cannot know about such things, whether you had abortion or not. This is what Roe v. Wade rested on. This is why it's like very directly related to privacy, and I think that's super interesting that it got turned over like this.
Yeah. Exactly.
Sorry, Rose. Were you about to say something?
No, all good.
Okay. Moving on to the next one. This is from Bikram. Thanks for the question. I just want to share the idea about creating a privacy hub for institutional adoption, where all the privacy-related projects can promote the privacy narrative instead of shilling their technology. Any opinion? I'm not sure I understand this question, but have fun with it, ladies.
I mean, I'm guessing Bikram is hinting at some sort of lobby organization or like some kind of industry association that can lobby policymakers. And I mean, yeah, I agree with that. To some extent, that's what the Universal Privacy Alliance is trying to do.
Yeah, I think we can have like many strategies playing out at once. And I'm glad that there are some people lobbying for that. And then there should also be some builders who are just kind of creating the tools without the lobbying.
Next one is from Jimmy. Thanks for the question, Jimmy. Any learning models coming up that respect privacy? Does he mean like AI models by any chance?
Probably.
I think probably. Do we know about any of them?
Two. So Brave, the browser is working on one as far as I know, and Defense Distributed, who makes the anonymous weapons, they're also making as far as I know, they're making some kind of a privacy preserving LLM.
Yeah. So I actually have a lot to say on this topic because I think that this is a little bit what we're going to see going into the future of like privacy washing. For me, when it comes to AI, the issue is not specifically privacy, but the question of who has control over what the AI learns and what it gets deployed for. So privacy is like part of that equation because without privacy, you can't even have that conversation to start off with. But like, you know, when we're moving into a space of kind of like zero knowledge proof, you know, kind of ZK compute, this kind of thing where you can actually compute on data without any human eye being able to see it. You know, you are still, you know, training models that can perpetuate the kind of same systems of control as we see today, but supposedly preserving privacy, and it becomes a little bit meaningless. So I think there's a lot to untangle in the space of LLMs and AI and how it intersects with privacy. I think kind of data sovereignty is more meaningful in that context. Data sovereignty and knowledge sovereignty.
All right. Thanks for that answer. Moving on to the next question. This is from our beloved Sarinko. By the way, join his workshop tomorrow at 3 p.m. UTC. So, hey, Jaya, Rose, and Sudo. If privacy allows for freedom and more people contributing to the anonymity set, how does Rose see the dialectic relationship between adoption and scaling versus wannabe normie sellout kind of narrative? Should I repeat that?
No, I think I got the gist. But yeah, so I think that this is basically it's not bad to have like a large number of users. Like obviously that's like a successful product, right? But my critique of the kind of mass adoption meme is that it's not the right it's not the right place to start, essentially, because you're basically saying, I want to take on the world as my home market. But I think when it comes to really, thinking about what are the apps that we're building, it helps to have a more targeted approach where you start with a very small market, but you try to cater to them in like a very good way. And from there you can kind of scale to a larger number of users. That's basically that comes from the awareness that really like the mass adoption meme hasn't been successful in it hasn't achieved its aims. So it's like maybe we need to start with concrete goals that are easier to achieve and kind of move forward in a step-by-step way. And also, there's a book. Again, like I'm a little bit embarrassed to bring up Peter Thiel again, but but there's a book called Zero to One by Peter Thiel, which is a really good artifact of Silicon Valley surveillance capitalism mindset, and it kind of explains their playbook. But some of the lessons in that book are also broadly applicable and very valuable. And he basically says, you don't want to start off with too big a market. You should start small. And he says, like, even 1 million users is like too big to start. So like he mentions, it's a very good book because he gives examples from the history of technology, like successful products, which basically they managed to corner and monopolize like some small market, and then slowly articulate. So like one thing is like in crypto, like can we create tools that actually cater to the hardcore community? Like, have we even managed to do that yet? I think some projects have, but there's also like an amazing amount of like people who haven't been properly onboarded into crypto within crypto. So it's like, can we start there, or what's an appropriate place to onboard users in a kind of targeted sense? I hope that is a bit long-winded. I hope that makes sense.
Makes total sense, and I also think it forces you to focus. It forces people to actually focus on the user and not, when you try and target a generic market, it comes with a lot of, first of all, assumptions about what the general market wants or thinks. It's like everybody has this kind of like weird mental projection of what is the norm, and it's usually kind of full of flaws, or it's lacking the kind of like actual user needs and user perspectives that I think you can get at much better with that narrow focus. So I find that a very interesting contribution. Thanks, Rose. I have to actually run, guys. This is my hard limit.
Wait. I have two quick fire questions. One is for you, Rose. Is DarkFi related to Sovereign? Jimmy's asking.
Yeah, I'm glad I saw that question, and I was like, I want to answer, because I would say that rather Sovereign is related to DarkFi. So I believe that there's a similar use of the inverted triangle in both projects, and I believe that in Sovereign it's a reference to Dark Wallet, which was the precursor to DarkFi. So there is a relationship, but I would say it's like, yes, it's the Sovereign, which has been inspired by the earlier DarkFi logo, because the Dark Wallet project in the early years of crypto was very much a symbol of like privacy and the true principles of crypto.
All right, and the last question is for both of you, and with that, I'll let you go, Jaya. Part 2 when? Gabriel is asking, which I think is a legitimate question given how many slides we skipped and all of that.
I think we should totally do a part 2, maybe later in the year or something. Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah.
You up for it, Rose? Let's go. No.
Yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, Rose, I'm going to do like a 3-minute intro, but I will have to ask a question from you during that. So can you stick around for that?
Sure.
Boss, have a nice evening and a good meeting.
Thanks so much. Okay.
Catch you later.
Bye. Thank you. See you.
Bye. Oh, wait, actually, there's one specific question specifically for you. So I'm also going to ask that. When marketplace? I guess probably regarding DarkFi.
Yeah, so that question is like also a question of like when mainnet. It kind of contains that question, because so basically right now we're very focused on shipping mainnet. What that looks like is we are building a new testnet. In parallel, we're getting the code audited. Then, after a period of testing and finalizing the code base following the audit, we will ship the mainnet. In terms of the marketplace, there's a great talk on this from the HTTP conference by my colleague Amir, which is called something along the lines of DarkFi defining the metaphysics of markets. And in that talk, he explains that the components for creating a marketplace basically already exist in DarkFi. So it's just a question of assembling them. But obviously, we need to ship the actual mainnet as well. I don't have an exact timeline.
Amazing. Can you, Salazar, maybe find a link to that and leave it in chat also for myself?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because talk. We can rely on our beautiful stream manager Salazar to do that.
Oh, okay.
So with that said, I'm gonna just head straight into the intro. 1 second, let me share my screen. All right, so as it's becoming a tradition here with Nim Shipyard, we are giving you a pull-up for this session, and it's also becoming a tradition that we always ask our speaker or presenter why they chose that given secret phrase, which is the password for the pull-up. So this was chosen by Jaya. So the question here is what Rose thinks why Jaya picked this phrase as a secret phrase for this specific conversation.
Are we going to get the answer, or is it like...
No, I'm asking you, Rose.
Okay, but we don't have Jaya's true answer, so we're just speculating here.
Exactly, we're speculating hard.
Okay, so I think it's probably because it's a little nod to the cypherpunks and the lunar punks, which we've discussed a little bit in this talk, but also maybe a nod to punk in general. And you know, so I suspect that's why she used that word. I will say though that like we spoke today a little bit about memes and some of the weaknesses of the cypherpunk memes and how lunarpunk tries to correct them, etc. And I think some of the mimetic weaknesses that we've encountered in privacy can also be found in punk itself, like the original punk movement. And basically anarchism in general, where there is this kind of this negativity, this reactionary mindset where there's often a very good sophisticated critique of the state and the systems of control and domination, etc. But rarely in punk do you find like a well-articulated alternative to the critique. So that's kind of what we're trying to do, I think, like, or that's what the proposal is now, is to like, let's actually, offer something and not just be in this reactive mode of saying we don't want surveillance.
Damn, I could really unleash like a whole monologue in response to that, and also like a shit ton of questions. But let's not do that. Part 2, we gotta agree on a part 2 for some point. Huge thanks for coming on, Rose. Let me just share with people how they can claim their pull-up, and then I will let you go this time for real. All right, so folks, you probably know the drill by now. You just need to go to nimtech.net/go/pull-up and use punk with the same spelling. So no capital letters, punk, just 4 letters. It's very simple today, but do it in the next 15 minutes so that the link is still open. Big thanks for joining. Also, big thanks for the amazing questions as usual. If your question was not answered, you can leave it in the general chat of our Matrix server, and I'll make sure either Jaya or Rose answers it. And then the next steps are check out DarkFi and Lunar DAO, incredibly cool projects. We've been leaving some links in the chat all along the conversation. Yeah, so once again, to mention, the Delegations Program blog post is coming on Friday. So if you're also participating in the operator track of Shipyard, then make sure to keep an eye on that, because quite a few details will be shared in that article. Tomorrow, there's going to be a Meet the Notes session with Serinko and Palmflick and Ionis from the community. That's going to be at 3 p.m. UTC. And also, I'm going to be talking at, so not hosting this time, but talking at a community masterclass with Jackie, who's head of community for Asia. So that's happening at 4:30 UTC. See you all there. Once again, huge thanks for coming, Rose. It was really lovely to have you on, and I hope to see you back for a part 2.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye.
Catch you later. Bye-bye. Have a nice evening, everybody.